Welcome to By the Numbers. This is a new program that looks to understand and share information when it comes to finances, whether it's in local government or a municipal budget, how education is funded, and how the state puts together its fiscal budget for the Commonwealth. And the mission of the show is to speak with local stakeholders and hear their perspective and concerns on the community's financial picture. Now, today's guest is the town administrator in Hanson. We welcome Mr. Mike McCue. Welcome to the program, sir.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
For folks who don't know, besides your current position as the town administrator, where else have you served as a town administrator?
Well, actually, I did about 15 years in the private sector, working for a research and development firm in Cambridge. And as I was working there, I decided to look into other opportunities. I went back to school. I got a master's degree in public administration. And my first foray into this field of employment, I was the economic development director in the town of Walpole. I was fortunate enough, after a few years, to become the town administrator in Mendon. After that, I moved over to town administration in Avon, and I was there for 7 years. From there, I went to Rochester. But the opportunity opened up in Hanson, so I applied for that, even though I had only been in Rochester for a little while. And the reasons were twofold, actually threefold. I'm a South Shore guy to begin with. I was born and raised, in Weymouth. My parents moved to Hanson approximately 15 some odd years ago. And actually, I had applied for the Hanson job many, many years ago and had been a runner-up. So I had a good feel about the town in terms of my viability there. So it's been about 15, 17 odd years or so that I've been in this line of work, and I find it very rewarding. The interesting thing about the job is it's never the same. From day to day, there's something new always happening, and it's a constant learning experience, and it's very enjoyable. It's a wonderful community, and I'm very glad to be in the town.
It's also worth noting that you've run for town selectman in a community previously, have you not?
Yes. I actually was a two-term selectman in Mansfield, which is where I currently live. I ran in 2001, and I was reelected in 2004, and was chairman of that board on a couple of occasions. The interesting thing about Mansfield is that the selectmen in Mansfield are pretty much the commissioners of everything. They're in charge of recreation, they're in charge of the water department, so on and so forth, to the point where we also had a municipal light department, and we were technically light commissioners as well, and I was chair of that for a few years. So it was a very interesting experience. I'd always had an interest in politics. I had been involved in many campaigns behind the scenes, and I had decided for two reasons to try to run for selectman. First, to see if I was viable as a candidate, if I could actually support myself in a successful campaign, plus the fact that I had already started to take those courses to get my master's degree, and I thought it would be just a wonderful nexus, a learning experience, to see things from the other side of the table if I were so fortunate enough to go on and get a job like I have right now. So it's worked out wonderfully.
Talk to me about getting involved with the budget process. When your first recollection of getting involved with the budget process, whether it's as a town administrator or as a selectman?
Well, it goes all the way back to the private sector, in which I was involved with putting budgets together for a few years there. I worked as a project manager, so I was involved in putting budgets together for various government projects, federal government projects. But as a member of the Board of Selectmen in Mansfield, we would generally give guidelines. We wouldn't get down in the trenches like someone like myself or a department head would. Try to give an idea where the limits were in terms of what the selectmen, as sort of an oversight board, the limits that we were willing to go to. Obviously, there's always concern about the possibility of the need for an override. And that's generally, obviously, not a very popular course to take. So we would just give some general thoughts about whether or not it was viable to go above and beyond the budget at that point. Now, in terms of working for a town, as opposed to being a member of a board of selectmen, starting back when I worked for the town of Walpole, I was involved with my own little department, and it wasn't too much money involved at that point. And so I started putting my own little budget together for that particular department. And obviously, as I graduated, in a sense, to a position of town administrator, I was involved, or continue to be involved, in pretty much everyone's budget. Not to the point where I micromanage. I like to think, I don't want to say I think, I know that the department heads are very mindful of keeping their budgets tight, of staying within their constraints. But that being said, I don't want, and I've always said this, I don't want department heads to think that they can't ask for something they think they really need. And I don't want to hamstring them. If there is a piece of equipment, if on some occasions, if there really is the need for an additional employee, I want them to come to me and make a case for that. And if we can make things fit, we will. Unfortunately, more often than not, we pretty much level fund. Very minor increases to the budget, at least in the municipal side, to the best that we can. Because again, we're very mindful of the fact that we have a limit of 2.5%. And the few times, and in all honesty, I've only been in a town where that's been attempted twice, and they have been unsuccessful. But if you're going to go to that particular extreme, you really need to make a very, very good case and show the people that you've tried to live within your means. So, but again, I feel that my department heads, both in this town and in previous towns, are very good stewards of the people's money, and we'll sit and we'll talk. Usually, the major departments like police and fire and highway, we'll sit down and we'll have a conversation with them, because obviously they're commanding, it's necessary to fund them at a higher rate than some of the other departments. But if there are some things that we see in some of the small departments, we'll bring the people in and we'll have a conversation, and that's pretty much what the FinCom does as well. So they kind of have to go around twice, with myself and our accountant, and usually with the FinCom. So it's a cooperative exercise, and if we didn't all pull in the same direction, we wouldn't be able to come up with a level budget every year. And thank God I've been able to do that both here and in my previous municipalities.
If you will, walk us through when the budget season starts. I don't think folks have a full grasp of what it takes when you're a town administrator, the individual who spends a lot of hours not only getting the numbers from the state, getting an idea what you're generating for revenue for the next fiscal year, talking with department heads, school officials, even to put that budget together. If you will, slowly walk us through that.
Well, in all honesty, the budget season really never ends. It has its highs and lows, but anyone in my position, and also department heads who are responsible stewards of their budgets, monitor them throughout the year. Sometimes there are things that come up throughout the year that you have are unexpected. We've got contingency plans for that, transfers from the reserve fund. But you need to be mindful, maybe not to the extreme that we're mindful right now, but you always need to be cognizant of how the money's being spent, and if there are any possibilities of shortfall. But the budget season really starts in the late fall, when we send out our notification to the various department heads of what our expectations are, what our limits are, and it's generally pretty much the same. We, as I had mentioned, we generally look for them to start out with a level budget. Again, not trying to keep them from asking for things that they really need if we can fit them in. And we go through the process of we give them a month or so, or 2 months to get those figures together and get them into us. There is obviously a deadline that we like to have them adhere to, but we try to give people as much time as they need to. And then at that point, we'll sit down, as I mentioned before, and we'll talk with the major departments. Certainly if we see something that's flagged that is really out of the ordinary, we'll want to have a conversation about, number one, whether we have the money to do it, and number two, whether it's appropriate to ask for whatever that is. And there's a whole process, as I mentioned too, I think, with the finance committee. They'll go through their procedures, and they'll ask a lot of the same questions that we'll ask. I'll appear more often than not. I'll go to the meetings with the FinCom, with the various department heads. Not all of them, but so we get to the point where we think we have a pretty good handle on what at least our budget would be on the municipal side, and we have conversations with the school department. Fortunately, this particular year, and I had said something about it when we concluded the budget season last year, that I would reach out earlier to the school department to at least start a conversation to make sure there wasn't anything really extraordinary that we need to prepare for ourselves for. And so they're aware on their side that there's nothing extraordinary that's going to come up that may affect them and affect our ability to fund them to the best of our ability. So as you're well aware, as I think the home audience is well aware, we're still working through what the school department is going to eventually come to us for in terms of their budget. It's been, in my time here, it's been a cooperative effort where we've been fortunate to come at the end of the day up with a figure that the town can afford without eviscerating the rest of our services, and that the school can live with equally not eviscerating what they're trying to do. And money doesn't grow on trees, and I think everybody appreciates that. And I know that the school department appreciates the fact that we need to have a viable police force and fire department and people to clear the snow out of the highways and fix the potholes, and of course an administration to budget and to oversee everything. And on our side, we certainly have the utmost respect for educating the children. So, and with that in mind, we were able to respect each department or each side's, in a sense, charge, and get to the best conclusion that we can. And I'm hopeful of that, and I fully expect that that'll be the same this year.
What do you feel are some of the current day issues when it comes to the municipal budget, especially when the revenue is somewhat limited because lack of a commercial tax base?
Well, it is difficult. I'll be honest with you. In a town like Hanson, it's uniquely positioned between two fairly major highways, between Route 3 and Route 24, buffered between both highways by a couple of different communities, which, they're more accessible to these modes of traffic. You find with economic development that a mode of transportation is probably the most important thing when it comes to economic development. So what we have been trying to do, and it does move very slowly because you've got a lot of people involved. You've got business owners, you've got the local government, you've got the state government, and in some cases you have the federal government. But we've been trying to work on, in particular, the site down on Main Street in South Hanson to try to move some redevelopment on there. To enhance the tax base, the commercial tax base, which of course would allow some relief to the residential taxpayer. Now that's not saying that at the end of the day, if we were able to achieve some new businesses in town, we would realize the new growth out of that. But we're still constrained by 2.5% on the other end, so it's not an instance where a new business is going to come in and all of a sudden the streets are going to be paved with gold. It's just going to make things a lot easier in terms of making budget decisions, and it's going to go a little easier on the residents. So it's important to try to put that sort of an element to the best of your ability, into your long-term and your short-term plans for a town. And we're certainly working very hard on that. It's probably one of the most important things that the Board of Selectmen have asked me to try to do, and on a personal level that I want to do, and I enjoy doing. Again, my start in this whole field was as an economic development agent, and my master's degree, I actually have a certification in economic development. So something I enjoyed. I enjoyed it as a member of the Board of Selectmen in Mansfield. It's one of the few things that I really dug into. I pretty much was hands-off as a selectman, but I did enjoy the economic development. So it's an important part of a future budget, and being able to perhaps do some of the things that we can't do right now.
Okay, and it's interesting because you talked about you worked in Avon, which was right there by Route 24. You
Yeah.
had one heck of an industrial park to be able to generate that revenue.
Oh, yes.
It probably had a split tax rate in that community as well in
Oh,
order to be
yes.
able to generate, the tax dollars you needed.
Yes, well, Avon was very unique, as you mentioned. Avon's only 4 square miles, and Avon is less than 5,000 people. And Avon had not only the industrial park, but on the other side of 24, it has the residential, the commercial retail park,
Right.
where Jordan's is located. And if I'm not mistaken, every one tax dollar, I think it was at least 60, 65 cents of every tax dollar came from the commercial side. So Avon was in a very unique situation where the budget was never a horrible problem. So much so that for such a small community, Avon still had its own school district. It didn't share regional. But again, it was a unique situation, being pretty much not quite in the middle, but having enough area, enough room on the other side of 24. The industrial park there was just phenomenal. GE was in there. I believe they just recently left, but there was some fairly heavy-hitting industries, businesses in there that were contributing mightily to the tax rolls. And again, that was a reflectant on, or as a result of the tax burden on the residents was, I mean, it was still there. It was appreciable, but it wasn't anything like any other town in the area.
Do you kind of get a sense that homeowners and residents, and I'm not saying this as the general populace, but that there really isn't a real understanding as to the concept of an override compared to a debt exclusion? Do you ever find that?
Well,
Other than that, they're going to see an increase
Yeah.
in their tax bills, but don't realize the difference between the two.
Yeah, and I find the people that I come across in Hanson are fairly well educated and fairly well attuned with these various things. The average person, they may not fully understand it. As you well know, a 2.5 override, an operational override, is what I always call the gift that keeps on giving. It's baked permanently into your tax rate, into your budget, whereas a debt exclusion is whatever the life of that loan is. It could be as few as 5 years, it could be as long as 20 years, but it does go away. And it's important to make those distinctions when you are trying to explain to somebody, you're trying to explain to the voters, what exactly you're after. And I think it's a lot more palatable to explain a debt exclusion as opposed to an override. And I mean, because in addition to an exclusion, there's something tangible you can look at. We need to build a new school. We need to build a new fire station. We need to, borrow a considerable amount of money to improve the roads that you drive on. That's tangible. They can see that. At the end of the day, there's something to look at. Plus the fact you're going to stop paying for it at some point. It's a little more. It's harder to explain or get your arms around when you're talking about a straight out operational override.
We know it's usually a tough endeavor, though. But in my time here, I think I can remember a couple of different times that overrides have passed. I think there was one for the schools for a technology upgrade that was shared between Whitman and Hanson.
Yes.
Hanson's was about $600,000 compared to Whitman's $800,000, and then I think there was a capital exclusion, a 1-year capital exclusion to buy a fire truck. Mm-hmm. Those are the two that I can recall. Why do you feel that it's such a tough endeavor to have folks, they'll go to town meeting, especially if it's education, you'll see, you don't have to worry about a quorum usually that evening, because folks will get there and they'll vote for it, but then when it comes to the ballot box, sometimes it's just not successful.
Well, I think you're talking two different things in a sense.
Sure.
You've got usually a fairly passionate group of people that are concerned about the education of their children, and they will show up. Again, you're talking about your kids, and you're also voting in public. Now, when you get to the ballot box, obviously it's private, it's confidential, and no one knows how you're voting. So. And I sometimes maybe somebody at a town meeting feels a little bit of pressure, might feel a little guilty, especially given whatever the particular subject is. But when they're behind the drapes, when they're voting, perhaps they feel a little differently, and they feel a little more at ease at voting the way they really feel. So that's why I think you see that sort of dichotomy. It's understandable. It's understandable.
At this moment, the neighboring town to Hanson, Whitman, is facing a significant deficit for fiscal 2020. There's already been conversations about not only doing a Prop 2.5 override, but doing a debt exclusion for a capital project that's under the levy limit, even wage freezes. Not asking you to comment on this situation, but how is Hanson at this particular time when it comes to putting together the fiscal 2020 budget?
Well, we still have some work to do. We're still looking probably to find or to balance out a couple of $100,000. It's not any different from the last couple of years that I've been here, and in all honesty, it's not really all that much different from any other town that I've been in. We're continuing to work on that. We meet at least weekly to have conversations about, again, some of the budgets that we may need to massage a little bit more. I'm fairly comfortable that the town of Hanson will be able to deliver at town meeting a balanced budget. Everything's relative. It still is work that needs to be done. It's still it's not easy at sometimes to go back and to cut a little here and cut a little there, and it all eventually adds up. But I'm still fairly confident that we will be delivering a balanced budget in the spring.
Other than salaries and costs to operate, what are some of the other expenses that can have an effect on a municipal budget?
That's really the major player, so to speak, in the budget process. We generally have fairly friendly, as it were, contracts with the unions. We look at a 2% increase every year, which is within I think cost of living and manageable. And that will translate into the non-union personnel as well. We generally, one is the same as the other, which is just typical growth. However, what you usually find, and we're fortunate this year because it's not going to be a budget breaker, but what you find that often can really cause damage is the cost of health insurance. And
it's a big one.
It is a big one, and we don't have a lot of control over that. A lot of the offerings are, guaranteed within the contracts. We do belong, as well as Whitman, we do belong in a group insurance organization, Mayflower, down out of Plymouth.
It's a county.
It was the former county.
But that's moved out of that.
Yeah,
since then.
they've brought other communities. They brought other, actually a few non-municipal organizations. But by and large, it's the old Plymouth County group. Just under a different name. And of course that, it stands to reason that, there's power in numbers in terms of trying to purchase health offerings. But in the last, it was 2 or 3 years ago, there was a significant increase to the health insurance budget through Mayflower. I was actually in a different community at the time. But we were also in Mayflower, and it really was a budget buster. And I think we went through 2 years where it was, close to just south of 20%. So you can just imagine what that does to you, because that's a major piece of money anyway. So if you're talking 20% of a large amount to begin with, you're really talking problems. Fortunately, this year, the recommendation, I believe, for the increase that's going to be official fairly soon is about 1.5%. So my only concern with the 1.5% is I believe that one of the reasons Mayflower got into the issue that it did back a few years or so ago is they had 3 years of 0% increases, which always, obviously looks great when you're looking at it with blinders on. But eventually things come home to roost, and you've got to catch up with that money you hadn't collected. So I've been told that what they're recommending out of Mayflower, that percent is mindful of the future as well, and mindful of hopefully avoiding the future sort of increases that we experienced a few years back. So, other than that, you don't really see too many other increases. Gasoline fluctuates, electricity fluctuates based on the cost of fuel.
Sure.
Insurance, other insurances tend to go up a little bit.
OPEB.
Well, OPEB's a whole nother situation, which we try to put a little money towards OPEB, but OPEB is something I don't think. Well, I'll take that back. I'm aware of 2 communities that actually have covered their OPEB debt, but 99.9% of the communities in Massachusetts are probably never really going to get to the point where they're covering that amount. We're talking vast amount of money. We're talking tens of millions of dollars. And to the degree that we can kind of at least show the state that we're doing something, the state, at this point is satisfied with that. My fear is that not too distant in the future, they may want to ratchet that up a little bit, and I'm not really sure how we would budget something like that. In a sense, it's dead money. It's money just put aside to cover the possibility of future expenses from retirees and such.
Right.
So it's not money that we really put to work for us in a sense. So that's difficult even in a concept, but. I'm hopeful that the state continues to work, and the state also has its own problems with this. I'm hopeful they come up with some sort of a solution that's manageable by not only to them but all of us. It's like I said, every municipality except 2 whose names I can't remember, but they are fairly well-off communities.
Okay.
So
Good to know. And just want to tell my audience, as we typically do, we try to keep these programs within 30 minutes, but sometimes they tend to go long. I predict that our conversation is going so well, it may run a couple of moments long as we're having a great conversation here with Mr. Mike McCue. I want to ask you in regards to knowing that you share a school district, but that when it comes to education in schools, many times, most times, if not all, that the monies, the funding for schools takes up a majority of a municipality's budget. And I guess, the last couple of budget cycles, we've seen some increases to the annual assessment. Do you see that's a growing trend that you're going to continue to see sizable annual increases?
Well, I think the hope is, and the conversations have been to try to control those. The schools need to ask what the schools think they need. And it's up to us, meaning both parties, both sides, to have the conversations, as I had mentioned before, to come up with something that both can live with. Just like the budget goes up on our side, the budget increases on their side. And I know that they would like to have more offerings at the school. I know that there's been a discussion in the last few years about full-day kindergarten. Those right now are not necessarily something that can be done given our budget and as you had mentioned, the town of Whitman.
Yep.
They're really expensive endeavors, and hopefully there might be some way that we can sit down and have a conversation how to get to those sorts of things in the future. I see the value in them, but they really have to be thought out more strategically and more. I don't want to say more cooperative, really, because it sounds like I'm saying we're not cooperative, but it needs to be done in a cooperative way. And I look forward to continuing trying to work with the schools, work with the town of Whitman, and to make both the school district and both of our communities great places to live.
Do you feel that there's enough transparency when it comes to not only the municipal budget, and again, when you go to town meeting, there it is. You get to see your line items and where the money's spent. But also when it comes to the school district's finances, do you feel that there's, across the board, that there's enough transparency?
Well, the school district, and this is every school, it's not just particular to our school district.
Correct.
They do have they have a different way of reporting. They have a different way of putting their budget together. It differs from the municipalities. But they work under, the auspices of what they need to work under. And I've been, when I've asked questions, I've gotten the information I've needed. As far as the transparency, as you mentioned on our side, it is a bit more broken down than you see on the school side. But I think if one were to ask the schools for budgetary information, for financial information, they're forthcoming with that sort of stuff.
I have to add this element because it's something in the past 10 to 15 years has been kind of a growing theme, and that is social media. How do you feel that social media is either an assistant or a detriment to getting word out about how things are going when it comes to budgets and the community's finances?
Well, as far as information about budgets, financial information, I mean, that's all pretty straightforward. And, I don't necessarily engage in social media. Maybe it's a result of my age. But I certainly would encourage that sort of information going out through whatever medium, people are receptive to these days. It's something, again, that I don't personally engage in. I don't really look at it. I try to direct my actions from what I hear from the Board of Selectmen and from what I hear from staff and what I hear from the people that come in and speak to me. And sometimes if you read some stuff on social media, it may take you in a different direction. So I tend not to look at that stuff too much.
Anything we haven't covered during our conversation today, but you feel you should take a moment to kind of discuss while we have the cameras rolling?
No, I think that this was a very valuable conversation. Hopefully the people that watch this show have gleaned some information out of it. They get some education as to how these things work. I would just like to say in closing that, as mentioned previously, we're working very hard to try to bring some economic development into the town for the purpose of trying to relieve everyone who's watching this show, relieve them of at least some of their tax burden. I can't say that's something that's going to happen overnight. I can say that it's something that I think about almost daily. I think that Hanson is positioned fairly uniquely, given the fact that we have the commuter rail station there, which I think has been underutilized in terms of potential economic development. One of the things that we're looking at is the fact that one of the trends right now is what they call location sharing, in which people who might work in the city can have a little satellite office and they can work in their community. But they won't be at home, because sometimes you say, well, I'll work at home today, and sometimes that doesn't quite work when you've got children and a spouse and other things that may distract you at the house. So, we're looking at the possibility of having one of those sorts of operations in town. But again, it's difficult, as I mentioned, because the town of Hanson doesn't own these properties. We need to do something cooperatively with those that own the properties. They've got certainly rights, and they can, at the end of the day, it's the United States of America, and you can do what you want with your property. But we're here, certainly my office and the Board of Selectmen, we have an open door for anyone who wants to come in and ask us what we can do to help them be successful, not only in South Hanson, but anywhere in town. It just happens to be that's, I think, a gem in the rough that once we get the right organizations, the right people, and the right funding in place, I think that something very, very significant and something very, very exciting can happen in that area. And here's crossing my fingers.
Thank you for joining us. And thank you very much for tuning into this special show as we look to inform the folks that we serve in both Whitman and Hanson about numbers, finances, budgets, where your dollar is being spent, where it's going on all levels. And if you have questions or want to see various guests, info@WHCA.tv is your best way. Until the next program, have a good day.